in the scheme of the retreat, today is Metta Day. Today is Kindness Day. I believe tomorrow is Compassion Day, and so on. So the theme of this mid-morning session is on metta itself, is on loving kindness itself. And I had it in my head that I had 3 hours when I was preparing to do this. And then I realized, oh, it's an hour and a half. Okay, so I've left out a whole body of material, which I will actually put in the resource document. I'm going to fill out my notes a bit so that they're a little more understandable to other people. And then after, at some point after this presentation, I will post them in the resource document so that you can see them. So the way we're going to do this today is I will split the morning into 2 sections of about 40 minutes each, with a bit of presentation and then a shorter led meditation to help fill out what I've been talking about. And I think we'll have some time for Q&A as well. But if you're not able to get your question addressed in this session, just a reminder that we do have an optional check-in session at 4 p.m. Eastern time today. So that is definitely a format in which you could talk about your practice and what's going on and anything that's coming up for you in the meditation practice. And it's also a place where you can ask questions about the material that we're covering. So for those of you who do not know me, my name is Shadayu. Let me spell that in the chat for you, because I think my name on the screen is Aryaloka. But my name is Shadayu. I'm one of the co-facilitators. And for this first part of the session, I want to talk about something that I've personally been reflecting on, I suppose, for the past 2 years, pretty intentionally. It is an aspect of this teaching that's actually very simple and very obvious, but maybe so simple and so obvious that sometimes we pass over it. I know that I did for quite a few years, and it's really the last 2 years that I've been really exploring this dimension much more intentionally in my practice. So, what this is? So the Metta Bhavana meditation. The second word is Bhavana, which is usually usually translated as cultivation or development. But we know that the Metta Bhavana, the loving kindness meditation, is part of a body of meditations which are referred to as the Brahma Viharas. This is usually translated as the divine abodes, the divine abidings, the abodes of the gods. They are also referred to as the 4 immeasurables, although that is not a direct translation of Brahma Vihara. But this word Vihara gets my attention as well. And the word Vihara can be used generally to refer to as a place of practice. So quite commonly, we will hear about Buddhist monasteries, for instance, referred to as viharas. It's an intentional space for practice. More generally, the word, this is the word that's usually translated as dwelling or abiding. So to dwell, um, or to be in an abode, um, to inhabit a realm. So it's a space. Vihara is a space. Uh, it's uh, it's a vibe. Um, it's an abiding, and I can't say that with a straight face. Most of you probably know why. It's because of the Big Lebowski. But when we talk about abiding, when we talk about dwelling, this is the word vihara. So we have, on the one hand, we have abiding or dwelling, and on the other, we have cultivating. Vihara and bhavana. As dynamics in meditation, we usually see cultivation as what happens as the sort of work of our practice. It is our practice. We're cultivating in a sense. And we're cultivating something. And when we've cultivated that something, we dwell in it. So there is a sense that cultivation comes first, and then dwelling comes after that, or abiding comes after that. I think that holds up a lot of the time. I also think that these are two dynamics that can be in play when we meditate from moment to moment. And in my own sense of practice, I think that if you boil these two dynamics down, what you find is the sort of active element of practice, which would be the cultivating part, and the receptive dynamic of practice, which would be the dwelling, the abiding. We usually refer to this dimension of practice when we're talking about balanced effort in meditation. So if we look back at a very well-known story from the early Buddhist tradition in the Pali Canon, I believe it was a mendicant named Sona who was going at his practice a bit too hard. He was engaging in walking meditation, I believe, too vigorously, to the point where his feet had become raw. And so the teaching that came out of that, once the Buddha spoke to him, was it was an image of a finely tuned instrument. And so our approach to practice can be something like a finely, or tuning an instrument. We can get things a bit wrong when we practice. We can be too active, we can be too focused, too energetic, which can create anxiety and pressure, and create a state of willfulness or even alienation. And we can be too open, we can be too unenergetic, we can be a bit daydreamy, a bit drifty. And when we do this, it's very easy to lose the thread. It's very easy to wander off in the practice. And so quite often what we're doing when we're meditating is we're correcting those extremes, and we're trying to come to a place where things do feel finely tuned, where we have an active dimension and a receptive dimension in the practice, where we have a sense of presence and a sense of ease. So we may notice, in addressing this whole area, we may notice that at times we need to become a bit more focused. We need a bit more energy. We need a bit more of that sense of cultivation. And then at other times, we need a bit more spaciousness, a bit more receptivity. We need that sense of dwelling, of abiding. Um, so as related to the Metta Bhavana practice and the rest of the Brahma Viharas, sitting with these images of cultivating and abiding have been really important to me the past couple of years in particular, and has really filled out my experience and my understanding of the practices. Another way of, or another image actually, you could use in relation to talking about abiding or dwelling, um, because it does have that receptive quality. It's definitely useful also to think of it as unfolding, allowing space for something to unfold, something to bloom, even. Likewise, with cultivating, um, we can think of creation. You're creating something. We can think of kindling. I find this a very evocative image. It's one we commonly use, I think, when we talk about working with the Metta Bhavana, as we talk about kindling. We're starting with a little bit of material, a little spark. We're coaxing that. Yeah, we're blowing on that. We're feeding that. We're coaxing it into a bigger fire. So we're kindling something. So those dimensions of practice are in play whenever we meditate. And I think particularly when it comes to the Metta Bhavana, when it comes to these practices, these larger metaphors of creation or kindling and of blooming or abiding, can be quite strong. So when we talk about this, especially if we're new to this, the question comes up: what are we actually cultivating? And like many things in Buddhist teaching, we often start with what we're not doing. We often look at what something isn't. And what we know about the Brahma Vihara teachings is that each one has what's called a near enemy, and each one has what's called a far enemy. Um, I, I crack myself up with this too, because I always think of that scene in the Holy Grail where there's two guards at a post looking out over a field, and you see someone approaching from a great distance, clacking together some coconuts. Yeah, there's this whole scene where they're watching and they're trying to figure out what's going on. Who's this knight approaching? And it keeps going back and forth between the two images, and the figure in the distance remains about the same distance away for what seems like ages. Scene after scene, he doesn't seem to make any progress, and then all of a sudden he's on top of them. Yeah, he bursts through the guard post. And I think of the near and far enemies in that way. I can't help myself. The far enemy, in this case, what you see from a distance, or what's rather easy to see from a distance, is hatred. So hatred is the opposite of loving kindness. And you can kind of see it coming a mile away. You know what hatred feels like. And we're all probably reasonably familiar with that quality of experience. And so you see it coming a mile away. It's obvious. Whereas the near enemy comes at you more subtly and almost by stealth, and can catch you unawares. So the near enemy of metta, of loving kindness, is a word pema, which is usually translated as attachment. This is something it's a near enemy because it sneaks up on you. It's easy to mistake for actual loving kindness because it can feel good. Attachment, when it's being met, feels satisfying in a certain way. So what do we mean by attachment? Well, with attachment, we have some degree of investment in getting something in return from the interchange. Yeah. So we have this goodwill for somebody, but it has, it has some conditions. It's to some extent desire based. Those conditions are desire based. We love, we can bring forth kindness because so and so is behaving in a particular way. And we know we're attached. We know we have investment in an outcome when so and so stops behaving in a particular way, and our sense of goodwill towards them is challenged. This happens quite often, I think. It's something that's seems very naturally human. When someone behaves in a way that we find unpleasant, the complex that then emerges from us tends to reveal a certain degree of investment, desire, and attachment to things being a particular way. So, to that extent, our goodwill, our friendliness is conditional. It only arises based on particular conditions. And when those conditions change, our goodwill is challenged. So metta is not attachment. Metta, in its purest form, is free of attachment. Attachment can also be a bit sentimental. I think this is worth noting. And sentimentality is something that we can mistake for true goodwill or true unconditional love. I think sentimentality actually has a lot of shades of meaning. It can arise very easily when something's really cute. Yeah, when something is very pleasing and makes us happy in a particular way because it's really sweet, it's really cute. It's easy to kind of have a sentimental response to that. So that's not what we're going for when we're practicing the Metta Bhavana. It might arise, and that, all of that's fine if it does arise. We're going to meet that with friendliness and understanding. But we're going for something more unconditional, more spacious, and less dependent on particular conditions. So metta is usually there's a list of words we use to describe metta to try and fill out its meaning. They include words like benevolence, friendliness, loving kindness, goodwill, generousness of spirit, and positive regard for others. One word that I think really fills out the meaning much more specifically is the word skillfulness. I think there's a real relation between loving kindness, between holding ourselves and carrying loving kindness in our minds, in our hearts. There's a real relation between that and how we behave, and how we think, and how we speak, and how we behave with our bodies. So when we talk about ethical skillfulness, we are implying that there's a connection there to this unconditional loving kindness, that is also in play. So the this dimension of thought, when we talk about metta as as skillfulness in a sense, it conjures up the results of skillfulness. It brings to mind that when we are skillful in the world, we tend to experience a particular type of happiness. a particular sort of well-being, which is, it's different than the temporary gratifications we get from any sort of indulgence of the senses, uh, or any sort of temporary satiation of craving. We experience, satiation, we experience gratification as something that makes us happy when our senses are well pleased. Yeah, we feel that sense of gratification after a good meal, after other things that we enjoy. We feel a sense that of of ease, and at the very least, we notice that our craving, our this sort of irritation of craving, is temporarily gone, and that's a pleasant experience. But the happiness that comes from skillfulness, um, although it shares some of the flavor of gratification, it's bigger than that, and it's longer lasting than that, and it's less conditioned, in a sense. It's freer in a sense of the tyranny of pleasant and unpleasant feeling and the cycling that we go through to avoid unpleasantness and to be in touch with pleasantness. So there's something in the happiness that comes from skillfulness, the happiness that comes from metta, that's starting to transcend that. And that's an important thing to realize as you're developing this. You really are tapping into something bigger than the cycle of craving and satiation of craving, which is very easy to talk about as happiness in a worldly sense. We're going beyond that with this practice. As we practice the Metta Bhavana and the other Brahma Viharas, we will start to notice that we probably become less selfish in the practice. The conditions that we place on our goodwill are gradually undermined. And so the metta that comes through is more and more unconditional. And there's a bit of a secret there. Yeah, there's a path to insight there. Our metta becomes more unconditional, becomes something more of the nature of liberation. So how does the cultivation element work, and how does that bring us to this sense of dwelling or abiding? Well, the way that cultivation works is very similar to how our mind works more generally. So when we ruminate, we usually talk about rumination as in a pejorative sense, as something that's unpleasant, and even sometimes unskillful. We can talk about rumination as unskillful. I think that's how we use it most of the time. So when we talk about ruminating on anxiety or ruminating on a resentment, we're referring to, running the same thing through our minds over and over, and in the process probably intensifying it. So I don't know if you've ever had an argument with someone in your head and had a full-on adrenal response because you were fantasizing about that argument so well. And if you do it again and again and again, the experience can intensify until you get bored or a bit tired or whatever. But you can do that to yourself just by thinking. You can evoke an adrenal response by telling someone off in your mind, or by even remembering a sketchy moment that made you feel nervous. So when we think about something, we give it a bit of power, we give it a bit of momentum. And with metta practice, we are intentionally dwelling upon, we are intentionally cultivating um, kind of the, really the opposite of the things we find undermining and detrimental to our mental well-being and to the well-being of our heart. So when we're cultivating metta, we are focusing on this quality, and by doing so, we are giving it momentum. We are giving it strength. We are perhaps starting with a little kindling, but the more we focus on that, the bigger that fire gets. Or we may be starting with a little drip of water, but the more those drips add up, eventually we get a little stream, and then a larger water course that has its own life, that has its own momentum. So cultivation it's about wishing in this sense with the Metta Bhavana. We usually think of wishes coming kind of from the forehead. Uh, it's sort of a willing of something into being, and sometimes when people wish, they assume particular postures, prayer, begging, wanting, and on its own, that sort of willful wishing is a bit disembodied. So we have to bring that wish into the whole of ourselves. We have to let that drop down into the body. We have to wish with our whole body. We have to wish with the mind. We have to wish with the heart. We have to hold metta with the whole of our experience in order to really create that strength of momentum that will begin to kind of carry us in a way. That will, at the very least, buoy us up as we go about our daily lives. So we're intending something, we're wishing something, we're bringing something into being. We can be too forceful with that. It's easy to try and skip over anything difficult in our experience. It's easy to try and bypass anything difficult, to try and get to the good stuff. We might have a tendency to push away or to shove away anything that doesn't match our wish, or anything that doesn't match our sense of what meditation should be, or anything that doesn't match our sense of what loving kindness is. But part of making that wish more full-bodied, part of making that intention more full-bodied, is being in touch with exactly what is going on. So if we sit down to meditate and our intention is to do the loving kindness meditation, and we feel resentful, or we feel jealous, or we feel, or we're craving something, or we feel anxious, that is our starting point. We do not skip over that. That is our starting point. And the skill we exercise there has to do with our capacity to meet whatever difficult thing or unpleasant experience is there with a degree of friendliness, with a degree of openness, with a degree of understanding, or even, if need be, forgiveness. Sometimes we may have a sense that we need to forgive ourselves as we sit down and come to terms with our experience. So when we notice and accept what is present, when we turn away from the tendency to force an emotion or to force something, when we don't bypass, we have the opportunity there to really let something unfold, to let something become more spacious. And that's what we're doing anytime that we're mindful, is we're bringing a bit of space to our experience. And so when we bring that space of mindfulness into the metta practice, this is where the dwelling starts, really. Yeah, this is where the sense of abiding begins. It begins with a bit of spaciousness, a bit of acceptance of where we're at. And from there, we may find ourselves cultivating, we may find ourselves abiding. cultivating abiding. Yeah. As our attention wavers, as feelings come and go, as thoughts come and go, we can start exercising those two dimensions. When we bypass, it's as if we've received a packet of tomato seeds in the mail. We open with excitement our packet of tomato seeds and we say, where the hell are all my tomatoes? That's what bypassing is like. We know that when we get our seeds in the mail, we've got some work to do. Um, we don't just have tomatoes because we got tomato seeds. We have to create a garden. So this is an image I like for cultivation. We are working with the conditions of our inner world. We are creating conditions in our inner world. We are, in a sense, gardening. This is a metaphor I really enjoy personally for the cultivation of metta. We can't force it to happen. We can't force tomatoes from seeds without preparing the beds, without ensuring adequate light, watering, weed control, pest control, organic pest control. We can't get the tomatoes without doing all those things, and it takes time. So likewise, with creating the conditions for metta, it takes time. And that time might be the time we're talking about in 40 minutes of meditation. It might be months or years as we work with deeper habits, as we work with strong resentments. Yeah. So we've got some stuff there. We've got some work to do. We've got some ground to prepare. And so cultivation is a bit like that. The other image I like for cultivation is the dinner party. If you want to have a successful dinner party for an honored guest, you have to do a bit of preparation. If your guests show up and you've forgotten that you invited them, and your house isn't clean and you haven't prepared a meal and nothing is ready, it's going to be pretty awkward and it's not really going to work. You might be able to throw something together really quickly and it might be all right. But if you remembered that you invited these people over for dinner, if you prepared good food, if you made sure your living space was pleasing to be in, maybe got some flowers, that sort of thing, then the gathering you're going to have will be happier. It will flow more easily, and your guests will be pleased. Yeah. And so if we think of metta as an honored guest or as an honored fruit like a tomato, we can think of cultivation as creating the space in which it can grow. So that's what we're doing internally. We're creating the space in which metta can grow, which means we have to deal with weeds. We have to deal with dirty dishes. We have to deal with everything around, everything that emerges in relation to that. That's all part of the process. And that's all energy. That's all the energy that we're working with. So let's do, I'm going to lead us through a short meditation now, and then we'll have a break after that. So this short meditation is going to be about 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll have a 10-minute break. So go ahead and take a breath and maybe stretch a little bit. Do anything you need to do to prepare to meditate for a short while. So just getting comfortable. Taking a deep breath or two. So like with any time we meditate, as we drop into this space, we'll begin to notice the direct experience of our senses. So just noticing what we hear, what we smell, what we see, what we taste. In whatever space that we're in. And then the very, very big sense, what we touch. This isn't just our hands, it's the whole of us where we experience the sense of touch. So we notice air on skin, temperature, the pressure of sitting, the experience of gravity. With touch, we notice the movement of the breath, the touch of the breath. And the breath is very central to our experience. We can potentially feel the breath in many different parts of us. It's very noticeable in the chest and in the belly. And all the little movements that come about when our chest moves, when our belly moves. And it's in that area where we can experience feeling, pleasant, unpleasant, or just kind of neutral feeling in our experience. So as we become aware of the breath, it's very easy to then become aware of how we feel. It's right there. It's right in the belly. It's right in the heart, in the chest. There are sometimes more complex emotions present. There's some brain and heart work here. So if there's an unpleasant feeling and we notice that it's anxiety, we might find ourselves wondering why we're anxious. And there might be a reason for that, or there might not. But we tend to start noticing the different emotions that are present in our experience. How they manifest in our thoughts and in our feeling, in our physical presence, even. So we're going to start just initially with this experience of presence, of just being here. And we're just noting that this is the open dimension of things. This is the sense of vihara, of dwelling, of abiding. We're just here. We're open to whatever's here. And we're just allowing that to become a bit more spacious if we can. And what does that feel like in the body to be spacious? And we might notice things coming and going in that space. The space itself may come and go. Feelings, thoughts, sense impressions, they come and go. And we're sitting spaciously with that. So into this space, we're going to bring some intention. So if we get in touch with our sense of metta towards ourselves, so bringing forth our goodwill, just noticing initially what it feels like when we evoke that, when we notice it arising, whether it's a feeling or a thought or an intention. What does it feel like when we evoke loving kindness for ourselves? What does it feel like in our face? What does it feel like in our throat? What does it feel like in our belly? What does it feel like in our heart? So we're noticing the presence of goodwill. And this noticing is as if a kindling. We are bringing forth something with the intention of growing it, the intention of allowing it to blossom in this space. And so as we hold these two dimensions in our experience. And just remind ourselves of balanced effort, focus and breath, a center and a surround. Cultivation and dwelling. So we'll begin to relax. We're not ending a practice so much as just opening our eyes. So when you're ready, you can open your eyes and begin to move. And take your time with this because we're going to take a 10-minute break now. Second part of this morning session, be a little briefer. I wanted to talk a little bit about ways of working in the Metta Bhavana. We, in introductory courses, we often make the point that you can have sort of a unique approach to the practice. You know, there's different methods that we use that some people find more useful than others, or more evocative than others. So when the practice is taught, you may have come across the phrases that are used to help center us on metta and to help kind of evoke that quality in our experience. So we can use words. Those words are, in a way, mantra. They are things that protect the mind. They're phrases that we repeat that are meant to evoke a particular state or momentum, to put us in touch with those qualities. So there's the phrases. And I think for a lot of folks, that's kind of how they encounter the Metta Bhavana initially. Quite often, it's the phrases: may I be well, may I be happy, may I be free from suffering and the causes of suffering, may I be completely fulfilled, may I be enlightened, you know, something like that. And there are other methods too. So there's we can use visualization in the practice, and this is where the sort of question of, oh, you know, wait a minute, what are we actually focusing on here? When we're doing the Metta Bhavana practice often emerges, because we can use visualization as well. And when we visualize, we're exercising the imagination in the way we usually think of perhaps exercising the imagination, which is sort of using fantasy in a way. So we're thinking of something visually, and we're using that to evoke a particular experience, to evoke a pattern of thinking, to evoke a way of feeling. And the visualizations can be pretty personal. It might be the visualization of giving a gift to somebody, or embracing someone, that sort of thing. Related to that is using memory. You can use memories. So for instance, in the second stage, when you're calling to mind the good friend, you might actually be calling to mind a memory that really embodies your goodwill towards that person. So you can use memory. And you can also use the felt sense of the experience. You can use your your presence, your body sense, uh, as a way of cultivating and dwelling in metta. I suppose there might be other ways as well, but in my experience, those are the most common ways that we speak about um, uh, engaging with this practice. So we have the phrases, the words that we use, we have visualization, we have memory, we have the sense of the body. Another tool that we can use that's, I suppose, more thought-based would be to ask questions of ourselves. This is another method, I suppose, where we engage with the practice through asking ourselves, how am I feeling? Or asking ourselves, what does it feel like when I think of my good friend? Those sorts of things, those sorts of lines of inquiry can be very interesting, um, and can help to bring us into touch with this practice. All of that is a bit tricky too. The mindfulness of breathing is pretty straightforward in terms of what we're focusing on. With the Metta Bhavana, it can be a practice which, when we're not particularly concentrated, can leave us prone to wandering off. Because what happens when you evoke memory? Well, you tend to think by association. So other memories arise, other things come to mind, and it's very easy to wander off in all of that. So whatever whatever we're doing, we're using it to stay with the practice. We're using it to creatively engage with the practice. And you may find you need to remind yourself of that a lot. I know I do. I catch myself wandering. I have to come back, remember my purpose. So all of those things use the imagination. When we use words, visualization, memory, it's all imagination. It's all us using that faculty. And imagination involves thought and it involves emotion. It has both of those qualities to it, in the sort of way in which we experience this. So we're going to have some thought processes happening, and we're going to be feeling when this is going on. Now, depending on what's going on, we might be approaching or experiencing metta in different ways because it's multidimensional. It's not just an emotion. Uh, that is a dimension of metta. There's a felt experience of metta, but it's not always particularly strong when we sit down to meditate. So it's worth remembering that the other dimensions include intention or wishing, which we've already talked about. So I won't say anything more about that. So there's intention or wishing. And then there's the very simple faculty of outlook, or even attitude. So when we actually look upon something, we often talk about metta as that quality of looking upon something in a kindly way. So there's something in the quality of our mindfulness and the quality of our attention itself that has an element of kindness to it. Um, you probably know what it's like to look at something harshly, um, or to look at something like when you're confused about what you're seeing. You tend to peer at it. You tend to try and sort it out by squinting up your squinting up your face, and what is that? What is that? There's a certain quality of attention. Uh, Bodhipaksha is very fond of using the the sense of soft eyes, which I think is really useful. I usually think of kindly eyes, but this sense of having the eyes soft when you're looking upon something is very evocative. So it's a way of looking, which isn't necessarily you know strongly emotional. When we look at something in a kindly way, um, it's not necessarily coming with a tremendous amount of feeling it, but it's a way of being, it's a way of looking. And then there's embodiment or feeling. This is another dimension of it, I think, where we do have more of a sense of emotion, more of a heartfelt sense, or even a belly felt sense, or even a sense in our limbs. um, as well as thinking of kindly eyes. Sometimes I like to think of my hands as being kindly hands. Um, so there's that dimension of it as well, which is a bit more felt. Yeah. And in my experience, quite often when I come to this practice, when I sit down to do it, what I'm working with initially is a wish or an outlook. I'm wanting to embody metta, and by the end of the practice, I'm usually embodying it. That's kind of how it goes for me. But I do get distracted. Um, and so quite often I'll have, when I remind myself what I'm doing and I find my purpose again, I'll probably be connecting with, okay, soften the face, kindly eyes, that sort of thing, as I kind of work my way back into a fuller experience of metta, a more multidimensional experience of metta. Um, so for this next meditation, what I want to focus on is the embodied sense. And this, again, I don't think this is anything new, but this is a bit personal in how I do the practice and in how I teach it. There are three metaphors that I like to feel my way into when I do this practice. There is the metaphor of spaciousness, which we've actually already touched on a bit today. There's the metaphor of warmth, and there's the metaphor of luminosity. And so in this meditation, in this little exercise we're about to do, I'm going to be evoking those three metaphors as a way of exploring the embodiment of metta. Um, and what I mean by embodiment is that sense that greater than being a wish, it's something that can permeate our whole experience. Yeah, in the same way that uh, to use the image from the dhyanas, in the same way that mixing soap powder and water creates something that is completely permeated. Yeah, two elements that are permeated with one another, or rather, the soap powder is permeated by the water. We're creating that sense in the body, and so that leads to the potential for this sense of radiance, which I think Satchita will like this, because in the earlier teachings of the Buddha, when he talks about the metta practice, there is this sense of directionality. There is a sense of radiance, like in all directions. So in the last stage of the metta bhavana practice, when we're meant to expand out to all of life, um, there is a potential there for metta to feel radiant, like it permeates our whole being and it radiates out from our whole being. And so this exercise is meant to help us kind of feel our way into that dimension of practice. Yeah. So go ahead and, like before, just do what you need to do to get reasonably comfortable. This is going to be about a 15-minute meditation. We'll have a little time to take a few questions afterwards. So, looking for a sense of ease in how we're sitting. So, just relaxing into our posture, noticing any tension, noticing any discomfort. But doing our best to approach any tension or discomfort with a sense of ease, with a sense that we're bigger than that. And just breathing into that space. Evoking our previous sits of the day as we settle in. So we've been creating this meditative momentum. We're getting back into that. So we're going to explore these three different metaphors. And we're going to do this through feeling as best we can. So firstly, as we arrive, as we become mindful of our experience, we are appreciating that an aspect of that mindfulness brings a bit of space. So as we feel our body sitting, as we begin to notice our internal weather, we're creating a bit of space. So we're just connecting with that quality of awareness, of mindfulness, in that it brings spaciousness. So what does that feel like? As we evoke spaciousness, what does that feel like? What does it feel like when we feel spacious? What does it feel like when our faces feel open, feel spacious? What does it feel like when the belly and the heart feel spacious? We're noticing that this is not a cold space. So if we bring forth the metaphor of internal warmth, what does that feel like? If we have warmth in the body, if we have warmth emotionally, we can remember what that feels like. We can evoke it. So when we look upon someone warmly, when we think of someone warmly, what does that feel like in the face? And what does it feel like in the belly and in the heart when we feel warm? Warmth is very akin to light. If we remember kindling and building a fire, we not only bring forth heat, but we bring forth light. So connecting with light, what does it feel like if we are luminous, spacious, warm, luminous, radiant? What does it feel like to be luminous in the face, to be bright? What does it feel like to be luminous in the body? Every cell, every atom, a little sun. Spacious, warm, and bright. And then taking a moment to just appreciate or notice anything in these qualities that reminds you of love, friendliness, goodwill. Looking for anything that's emotionally similar, that has a similar vibe. Just making that connection. And gradually, when you're ready, you can begin to move and open your eyes.